Hello and welcome to the History of Philosophy in China by Peter Adamson and Karen Lai, brought to you with the support of the Philosophy Department at King's College London and the LMU in Munich. Online at historyofphilosophy.net. Today's episode will be an interview about Daoism and yin-yang theory with Robin Wang, who is professor of philosophy at Loyola Marymount University, the other LMU. Hi, Robin.
Hi, Peter.
We have been talking about yin-yang already in the context of the Lao Tzu, but maybe we can back away from the Lao Tzu for a minute, because this is a concept, or I guess pair of concepts, that we do find in earlier texts. Do we know where yin-yang, this pairing, came from? And what was the basic idea in the period up to the Lao Tzu?
Yes, I just want to see these ideas is really traced back to earliest Chinese primary text. For example, Book of Changes. And then one of a specific text is a book of songs called the Shi Jing. In that text, the first time the yin-yang appear come about is going to a hill and to look at which side is yang, which side is yin. So that is the earliest text we can see. But however, this main idea you could see most come from experience with sun, right? So sun provides lights, natural lights to see and the rhythm to live. But also China has created a sundial to tell the time, roughly 800 BCE. So more important, the sun is provide the guidance of farming. For example, historically speaking, China has these particular terms for farming practice. It's a 24 solo terms. And so it's a traditional calendar system that aligned with the sun's position throughout the year. Then they know when to farming what. So that's the human experience. Another experience comes from the divination. So human beings were trying to thinking about, oh, should we go to the war? Should I get married? Should I do? It's always yes and no decision. Through this kind of decision-making system, then the Book of Changes provide some sort of spiritual or conceptual understanding of the world, and then put this kind of understanding into a practice. So this is, we can see quite bad. And then there is books called Books of Document, and basically talk about the history. And that book itself also appeared to discuss the yin-yang. So when we're thinking about the yin-yang concept, I usually call it yin-yang thinking. So the yin-yang thinking, it's the way to understand the reality, including cosmos, and understand human life. And the one way to illustrate the idea probably is come from Huananzi. This text itself using a tree as the examples. Think about a tree. Tree has two basic parts. One is root, and then another one will be branches and the leaves. So we think about the yin-yang is like a root of branches of Chinese thinking. So as soon as you protecting root or stimulate the root, and 100 branches and the leaves and the trunks will respond and flourish. So this is, we can see how yin-yang, usually people think there is different way to categorize yin-yang. Some will be yin-yang as the soul of Chinese culture. So that's one way. So now what about the basic idea, like your question, what is yin-yang is all about? Well, one way I think you look at the yin-yang, it's very simple. Everybody thinks they know yin-yang, it's balanced and it's interdependent. But another one is oddly very complicated. So one way to think about yin-yang is connectivity, is interdependence, it's dynamic. Of course, it's complementary of reality, cosmos, and human life. So basically, it's a relation relationality is connectivity. If you really want to go into this specific, and you could ask him, well, how do this related? How things connected? How do we understand the relativity? I can give 6 specific ways to define that.
Just to make sure the listener knows what some of the things you mentioned are. So you mentioned the Book of Changes, that's the I Ching, right? And you
Yes.
mentioned
Mhm.
the Shi Jing, which is the
Yes.
classic of poetry. And
Yes.
maybe it's worth mentioning that's one of the Confucian classics that he supposedly edited, right? So
Yes.
that shows us that the yin yang theory is also part of the Confucian tradition as well as the Taoist tradition, which we'll get on to talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
having clarified that, go ahead, hit us with your list
Okay,
of
6
six.
is quick, right? So first the things in the relationship we do is contradictions, opposite, and the tension, right? Two things are different. When we see how the people related because they have differences, then we relate it. So that is the one. Second question is kind of interdependence. So the ones we think about the door, there's two mode. Okay? So it's open and closed. So this is you cannot have one without another. Then it's not called a door. If a door is not open, only closed, then it's a wall. If the door is always open, then that's a space, empty space. So third one is mutual contentment. So one lead to another. So that's when we can think about yin yang symbols. It's a two fish head. There was a duck without a duck inside the light and the light inside of the duck. If you take that two little small dot away, that's not yin yang symbol anymore. So it's not yin yang. So in order to stress the idea of yin yang, that we see there is a mutually contentment. The number 4 is interactions and resonance. So we can see each yang elements influence and shape each other. So this is very important. Sometimes you interconnecting with others, not necessarily with words or terms. It's just you resonating with someone or some actions, some gestures, some things. So that is something we can see interactions, the resonance. Number 5, people probably know complementary or mutual support. This is yang supports yin, supports yang. This is in order to have, like, say, perfect friendship. Then you have to mutually complementary and support each other, right? So the 6th one is the exchange and the transformation. One thing is we have to pay attention with about yin yang ideas is we cannot treat the yin yang as a fixed concept, fixed, in the identity or fixed views about the things. Oh, this is yin, that's it, that's yang, that's it. No, yin yang is constantly change and transform. So one side become the others, and in this endless cycle. In other words, you yang can become yin, and the yin become a yang. So I will say yin yang is more than a concept. It's a way of seeing, living, and relating. So it is this conceptual framework, and also it's a lived practice, and it's a linguistic habit. Why I say so? Because many Chinese words come from yin yang a concept. For example, cloudy day will be day of yin,
Mhm.
and then some human body parts, you also call this yin part or yang part. So yin yang, this term itself, it really plays an important role even in Chinese language. So we can see many ways, see the yin yang is at once metaphysical and also mundane, philosophical and practice. So woven into the rhythms of daily life and the structure of thought. So one thing maybe you can think about is the yin yang is not just present in everything. It is a very pattern by which everything come to be. So I could see maybe you want to see everything everywhere at once. That's
Mhm.
yin yang.
Okay. Wow. That's great. So I love the list of 6 things. It's interesting that different examples illustrate the different aspects of yin yang more or less well, right? So if you think about night and day turning into each other,
Yeah.
that gives you
Yeah.
the dynamic sense. Whereas that doesn't sort of leap to mind or to the eye when you think about, say, friendship, like a perfectly
Yeah.
complementary friendship, or maybe male and female. So
Yeah.
I guess the complexity of it is not just that it has so many aspects, but also applying it to different cases where it seems to illustrate the different cases or illuminate the different cases in different ways, right?
Yes.
So let's get on to the question of yin yang specifically in Taoism, because you've just
Mhm.
given us a very large kind of picture of what was going on with yin yang thinking, as you call it, up until the time of the Lao Tzu. Is there a more specific take on yin yang in Taoist philosophy?
Yes, here so-called Taoist philosophy probably was originally in two classical texts. One is Tao Te Ching or Lao Tzu, one is Zhuangzi. So if we just quickly reading a Lao Tzu, yin yang only appeared once. That is in chapter 42. But spirit yin yang is contained in Lao Tzu or Tao Te Ching. So I want to think about how different, Lao Tzu's yin yang, in the yin yang in Taoist philosophy, and then look at the yin yang in general sense, right? So one of the things that I want to think about, let's look at chapter 42 in Tao Te Ching. And Lao Tzu mentioned it once. Think about everything. He used this word. So that means the ideas, all myriad things, or 10,000 things. And it's a fu yin bao yang. This is a specific word. I wanted to little bit unpack this. Carry, fu is a carry, embodied, yin, and embrace yang. So many other things, interact with yin yang, and then how things come into harmony and the balance of how things flourish. So here we want to look at how yin yang works in this kind of Taoist lens. Want to think about what that means, fu in the carry, embody. So it's something which means there is something you carry unseen, it's invisible, it's hidden. Okay, so what's the bao means you embrace. Literally put your hand around something. In the usually sense is a bao your child. So what this means is what is yang is something you are seeing. It's in front of you. It's present. It's you means there. You can see it. You can feel it, right? And then appearance. So that's, let's see, masculinity. For example, usually people like to think this. But let's think about the yin. What's that yin? Yin is on your back. You carry it on. And it's something not present yet. And but it's that means it's not exist. It's nothingness. But this nothingness not means not exist. So this is probably feel like little bit philosophical about it, the metaphysical, mystical sense to it. But I think we probably think about all existence actually have two aspects. One aspect is something confront, you see it. And then there's another aspect is your back. Usually they call the femininity. You're not seeing it. So what is important in Taoist philosophy is they activate this unseen, the hidden pattern of reality. So Taoism to invite us, or actually to asking even sage, common people, to pay attention to something not present yet, but perhaps it's going to, or things could make important changes. So it's non-presence, it's nothingness, emptiness. A Buddha said, "Kong," a Dao we would say, "Xu." It means nothingness. It translates pretty much the similar, but pay attention. That's about yin yang. It's about to activate yin force. Pay attention to yin power. I think this is maybe quickly summarize this yin yang, this in Taoist ideas very different than another general Chinese philosophy, especially Confucian traditions. But then I want to mention another one. Question is, how do we really know the power of yin besides conceptually saying, okay, I need to pay attention, something hidden, something non-present, something is nothingness. But how do I know? This is a Tao give a specific guidance for knowing yin, which is pay attention to your body. So the body have how much we really know our body. So in other words, the body, in order to know the world, you should know your body because the body is a miniature of nature. So body can teach you many things and also to help you to understand reality. I think this is a quick ideas why we think about a particular Taoist philosophy, particularly Lao Zhuang's a we will see the yin yang aspect.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The idea that the yin is on your back and so, or maybe sort of behind you, so you can't see it, and yang is right in front of you, so you can embrace it. I never thought of that
Yeah.
passage that way. That's really interesting. And maybe the reason yin is associated with the body is because it's inside the like your sort of hidden depths of your own body, whereas the yang represents what's around you. So it's sort of the same idea of the hidden or interior as opposed to the exterior. Is that the idea?
That's part of aspect, but it's not the totality because your body also inside your body consists the young organs.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
you
So it's
also
more,
young.
it's always more complicated, right?
Yes, yeah, young is also function like a young. You know, your body structure-wise things, it's like, rather than function like a stomach,
Mhm.
the intestine is young because it move. So there is a different way you can think about the yin yang, but at the same time you want to grasp the core idea of yin yang.
Yeah, I like that the body as such would be considered yin, but then within the body, there's both yin and yang aspects. It gives us this idea that at different layers, the yin yang contrast kind of comes to the fore over and
Yeah.
over. Well, I have a question about this Taoist attitude towards yin and yang.
Mhm.
You talked about it just now in terms of calling attention to the yin because it's often hidden or escapes notice. But sometimes people talk about Taoism already in the Lao Tzu, for example, as actually preferring yin over yang. So somehow trying to elevate yin over yang, for example, saying that the hidden valley is better than the mountaintop, that sort of thing. Is that a fair representation of what's going on in the text?
I think this style and prefer this in, I think it's a philosophical position. So this position, I think we probably can find the three arguments for it. Okay. So first argument is necessity of yin. In other words, structure of beings. So because we usually don't pay attention to these hidden elements. Now let's to look at the examples. So what do we think about why yin is important, why it's necessary. If we use the farmers examples, everything seems like emerged from dark ground, hidden place, right? A plant. We started with the seed and then growing, but the seeds is started in the soil, in the earth, and then you're growing. So the nutrition part, why we pay attention. And another thing is to think about the how human being made in this natural way. Think about male sperm contribute to it, but female carry the body for 9 months, provide nourishment, right? Allow fetus to survive and develop. What this thing is, we see yin force where plays a role and then to nourishing the things. So there is the idea to see the things evolve or develop in this process. And this process take place because yin's existence of yin. So this is one argument we can have. Second argument is transformative power of yin. If we look at the Tao Te Ching talk about like a 43, right? They talk about everything. They think about soft things under heaven overcome the hardest. This is the use of the word soft and then go to the rock. Then we also talk about knowing the male, but keep the female, be the valley of the world. Why the valley is so important? So one way you think about it is because the valley always presented uncertainty, prevents the things we do not know. We do not know what will be happen next. Just like sometimes we can do a lot of things to cultivate our body, but we don't know how body will do, right? How you sleep, how you digest a certain food, how you feel today. It's all that the body function its own way where your human rationality cannot complete knowing or grasp it. So in other words, there is generative and a changing power to we attend the yin. So we usually thinking about yin is called a silent transformation. It's making qualitative the changes by accumulation of quantity. Okay. So we can see Lao Zhuangzi talk about how a cumulative effort eventually become decisive changes in that point. Usually we get that turning point that is yin plays a role. You add up, but you don't know when things will be flip over. That you don't see, but things happen by the work of yin. Then, of course, the water, the uncovered block, is all this all talk about how yin's the softness, or usually talk about the weakness, but that is the transformative power. The third argument is the efficacy of yielding. So knowing the yin. So this is really give human beings a new horizon. You always see yin, a Taoist philosophy, provide this new horizon. Think about knowing. It's a epistemological issue. How do you know? You only know what's in front of you in this moment that we will think about. That's yin, knowing yang. But there is more you unknown. Any knowing implies unknowing. In other words, any given point of knowing, and it's only small knot in giant and coherent generated unknowing. So a web, unknowing web. So in other words, any knowing contains infinite unknowing because known disclosed only part of unknown. So in this way, we are thinking about one, you being happy to know something, but at the same time, you need to be cautious. There is a law unknown in front of you. That is yin. That is pay attention of yin. So this is, we can see one Taoist philosophy asking sage to cultivate the yin, and there is a whole reason for it, not just the practical advice, but it's with a metaphysical stand and epistemological power, to let you know yin existed. There is a necessity of yin. There is a transformative yin. Yin could lead you a big trouble. Another way we can see it, right? So you add up in a relationship, you add up, you cumulatively, you add up, you say, oh, it's okay. Eventually you explode. Okay.
Right.
So the third point is to be cautious, to examine what do you think, what do you know, what is the nature of the knowledge. So yin give us a different perspective on this.
So a good example of that would be something like the passage about knowing the five tones and the five flavors, right? And the five colors. And you have these knowledge of these, you know, five properties that have names. But
Mhm.
then and that's sort of the yang, right? The yang
Yes.
aspect. And the yin aspect is this infinitely varied range of colors and flavors and sounds that you don't know because you haven't put a
Yes.
name on them, right?
Yeah. But this is one aspect, right? There is a deeper aspect. It will be like this. You know, the five, actually, there's a thing that Dao De Jing talk about that. The passenger said, you know, five sounds, five colors, all this, but actually you become more confused because you don't know what to choose. And you have more choice. Sometimes you're confused. So this is something pay attention to. You don't think accumulate more will be better, but also you lost the ability to knowing.
Right.
So it's very paradoxical. So
Yeah, it's
I
not
think
like
that
it's not like the idea is, well, just learn five more tones or five more colors and then you'll be done, right? The idea is that's not the right way to think about knowledge in general,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah.
It's yes.
So there's this other pairing that comes up quite a bit in the Lao Tzu, which also
Mhm,
comes up in the title of your book. This when you wrote a book called Yin Yang, The Way of Heaven and Earth in Chinese Thought and
mhm.
Culture. And that's a pairing we haven't talked about yet. Can you tell us why heaven and earth would be associated with yin and yang?
Okay, so this we have to trace back to how Chinese is thinking about heaven, earth, or you can say how do they think about the cosmos and humans' relationship in the cosmos? Because in Chinese, we say framework, a Chinese mentality of the cosmology, whenever you want to see it, they always have three elements: is heaven, heaven is a 天, and then earth is a D, and then the human is a gem. So they always have this triad. And then why yin yang is there, right? So there's three ways we can think about this. So the one way we think that is a cosmic embeddedness. So yin yang as a breathes in heaven and earth. One of the way we think about, we live in this triad. There is no separation. Okay, human being separated from heaven and earth. Why? Because first of all, heaven provides season. It's a timing. The seasons, the day, night. Okay, earth is provide positions or territories. Okay, and so what the human beings have the harmony with heaven and the earth. So this is some sort of a interconnections. You cannot to talk about one aspect of this. You can talk about one aspect of triad, but then you have to think about this is becoming is holistic. So in the book of changes, specifically talk about the one yin and the one yang is called the Dao. But the Dao, you will think about it, it's continuous. The Dao is a lived with heaven and earth in there, in motion. So second way, we can talk about yin yang. You cannot talk about the heaven and the earth because they are all in it. And then another thing, yin yang is inner waves of reality. So one way we think about the yin yang, it's as I mentioned, right? Yin yang is not a fixed concept, but also you can yin yang is not a separate layers. Yin yang is a connective tissues. Here I like a quote Huainanzi talk about. They said, "Heaven is a yang light activity, elevation. Earth is yin darkness, stillness, receptivity. Heaven as a father, earth as a mother, yin and the yang as wept, and the four seasons as wept." So this is weave metaphor to shows kind of like yin yang is a structured thread and the fabric of the reality. One way I look at thinking about this yin yang, it is a deep logic, you know, of how heaven and the earth produce, sustain, and reveal of all things. The third point will be human positions. In other words, there is no separation between humans and the heaven and the earth. So this is primary claim or statement in Chinese philosophy and the culture called the unity and heaven and earth and human beings. Right? Another word, what a human being should do in this, in you facing, look above this heaven. Oh, by the way, I want to say heaven is the sky, okay? Not in the Christian's idea of that heaven. And human beings have to, we talk about the mandate of heaven that usually seen to make harmonious connections between heaven and the earth and the human within. What is a measurement of this harmony or the human doing good work? You're doing good mandate of heaven. In Taoist concept is maybe also Confucius too, to think about this. You can reach harmony between yin and yang. Okay? So yin yang is measurement. Yin yang is kind of a standard as well. And to let you know, how do I know humans have done excellent work? Then let's check whether yin yang is in the harmonious and the balanced state.
Another pair that's often associated with yin yang, and we've talked about this in the podcast already, is gender, so female and male. What does the pairing or the association of the pairing of male and female with the pair yin yang, what does that tell us about warring states' conceptions of gender and philosophy of gender?
The first way to describe Dao is Mu, that is mother. So the mother, the Mu, it's a broader sense, not just the biological mother, but it means a source of heaven, earth, and the myriad things. So Dao, as a mother, is responsible for origin of all things. This and also provides the patterns the things should follow. One of the things we can thinking about, the world is not created, but rather world is generated. And this is a word Chinese called the Shen, is called the generation. So Dao De Jing never talk about the creation, but rather talk about the generation. That's just the mother gave birth to myriad things. So this is one thing we can say because there is no male figures in Dao De Jing. And then another thing we can thinking about is the gender issues. I think Lao Tzu or Dao De Jing asking sage to become female and to possess femininity. What's that means? First, we want to think about the female femininity is cosmic force. It's a cosmic in force. It's not necessarily is we call about woman. Woman is a social construction in Chinese word. Fu is a social position, either your daughter or wife and mother. That's Fu is a social position. But femininity and the feminine, this is for Dao De Jing, is the cosmic power. Therefore, we talk about the yin, also femininity, and is filled of potentiality. So it is a necessary part of any and every generative process. It's valued and respected and celebrated. So because it's a spontaneous potency of Dao, it's a female, or Dao become female. So I wanted to see one of the things also through the history, most of we culture and the traditions is to celebrate the male aggressiveness, power, this kind of male qualities. But in Dao De Jing reversed this value system, rather to ask a sage to cultivate and to nourishing femininity. That because to see the potential power of femininity. And this is also, we were thinking about the power is not the domination, but rather competence to make things happening, to generate the things. I think this probably we can see the differences. Okay, why Dao De Jing favors female femininity.
It resonates really well with your list of arguments for why we might want to place a high value on yin. So, for example, you said one of the arguments was that yin is generative, for example,
Right,
and another was that it has power, right? So,
right.
actually, what we're seeing there is just that those arguments apply to the feminine relative to the masculine, right?
Mhm.
Listening to you talk about this, I get the strong feeling that for you, this isn't just a kind of historical, archaic set of ideas, because you keep kind of applying it to fairly familiar phenomena that we still have with us today. So I take it that you think that yin yang thinking is still something that we could put to use now. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. You're right. I'm not treating yin yang as a cultural artifact, but I think it's a living philosophy of practical wisdom. It can help us dealing with many issues, especially our current troubled world. I want to asking two questions and seven different ways to think about, or six different ways to think about why yin yang has incredible relevance. Question with when I ask, especially your audience, maybe you want to learn yin yang. One question you can ask: does yin yang offer an alternative way to thinking, feeling, and doing? Second question will be: can we move from struggle with problem to flow with problems? Problem is inevitable, but solve the way to solve problem is multiple. And find the best way to solve the problem, not necessarily solve it, but at least the best way to solve a problem. That's how wisdom lies, right? First of all, we think the yin yang can help us to do finding dynamic balance in complexity. The world is very complicated, right? Then we can use yin yang to think about the way to think about independence, flux, and the balance. So we can use yin yang to dealing with some sort of ecological, social, or technological problems, because this yin yang really reflect the flexibility and the wholeness thinking and the harmony, right? Rather is rigid, either or this kind of distinction. Secondly, we think about the relation ontology, because yin yang emphasizes relations rather than isolated essence. How can we really create win-win situation? Third is bring into ethics of adaptivity, adoptions. Yin yang approach promotes enhancing change. And we think about the contradictions. Yin yang is not denying or walk away from contradictions, but rather face it and encourage adaptability and receptivity. So we can think about especially conflict resolutions in leadership and innovation. Fourth is gender and identity fluidity. So we think about yin yang. We think yin yang is non-dualistic, complementary logic, offers a way to thinking beyond rigid categories. You're really honoring diversity and balance without enforced hierarchy. That's very important. So basically, we think gender ease, bring us this gender ease. Another issue is the mental health. I think this is really good based on my own experience to my student to see they are going through and dealing with lots of hard life experience. So Yin offers a profound framework for mental health because it teaches us to embrace balance, fluidity, and change. So, for example, sadness, it's not a failure. Okay, you're not doing something well. You unsuccessful. Could we turn into failure into gift? So another word, if you have sad, you're not happy, you're stressed, your anxiety, all this, but then you can think about this is in phase of cycle, right? Sometimes in phase will change, will turn. Basically, you give the death to joy. So we were thinking about how this yin yang change, or how the happiness and the sadness, how ease, calm, and anxiety exchanges. That's part of life, acceptance, and then you work with it. So another question, so we think about culture and the intercultural dialogues. So yin yang is a gateway to understand the Chinese culture and the philosophy, fostering cross-cultural respect and dialogue, especially in this kind of globalized world. So one things I want to think about a very useful even for myself. Okay, so I look at how yin yang help us even understand this digital world. I wrote a paper, Can Machine Flow Like a Dog? It totally use yin yang concept, guide me to dealing with yin yang and the AI. And the last things I think about this yin yang, because there's different layers to understand yin yang. Most people already got an idea of yin yang, this sense of balance. I probably will see we need more yin for life, especially for a happy life.
I guess there's probably more where that came from, but that seems like a really good note to end on. So thank you so much for taking us through that tour of yin yang thinking. And I think like at this point we can see why you view it as a kind of thinking, because it's sort of almost universally applicable and can be useful in all these different areas. We're actually maybe going to test that next time in a way, because we're moving on to the resonances between the Lao Tzu and Daoism and a notorious famous book from ancient China, Sun Tzu's Art of War, which
Oh,
turns
that's
out to
great.
be surprisingly similar to the Lao Tzu in all kinds of ways.
That's application of Lao Tzu, the Taoist
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
philosophy. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So that's actually, in a way, the question of the episode is whether the art of war is applied Taoism. So that's what's coming up next time. For
Oh,
now, I'll thank Robin Wang very much for coming on the podcast
oh, thank you for having me.
and invite the audience to join me and Karen next time as we turn to Sun Tzu's Art of War here on the History of Philosophy in China.